Hi, welcome to Season 3, Episode 12 of The Weekly Wave. I'm Matthew Lyons.
And I'm Aaron Johnson.
And our special guest here today is Fire Chief of Abington, Mr. John Nuttall. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you, gentlemen, for inviting me to your show.
Thank you for coming down. So for my first question, we recently had a local business owner on, and I asked him if this was always a dream of his to own his own restaurant. Was it always a dream of yours to become a firefighter?
I actually wanted to be an astronaut, but that didn't work out because I didn't pursue that. But I think I knew very young I wanted to be a firefighter. I grew up under the original TV series of Emergency back in the mid-1970s. I was a little kid back then when it was still on, not reruns, but actually on each week. Every Saturday night at 8 o'clock we had Emergency. So I grew up with that. And that was a fascinating show at the time because not only did it show firefighters and what firefighters do, but it actually talked for the first time about what paramedicine is and what paramedics do with treating people with advanced medications and advanced procedures prior to bringing them into an emergency room. So that was one of the first shows I remember as a young kid, way back. And then I kind of, you go away from that for a bit, you do other things. I really wanted to be an astronaut my whole life, to be honest with you, but that didn't work out. And then after graduating high school, and I graduated at the Abington High School in 1986, I was working for another company that did fire protection systems, fire extinguishers and like that, and there was a lot of full-time firefighters that were working there. That was their part-time job, and they really talked me into taking the firefighter test, and from that point on, it kind of got me back on track with that original dream, and I never looked back. I've been a part of that ever since.
Wow. Do you often rewatch the reruns of Emergency and just kind of get that feeling again, or?
We do, and I've watched it with my kids. One of my sons is a firefighter paramedic in a different town now, and a lot of times we'll critique what they do, and granted, that's well over 40 years ago, the show and the technology, but we're still doing a lot of the same things, whether it's the firefighting tactics or some of the paramedicine tactics. The technology changes and some of the medications change, but for the most part, we're doing very similar things. On the East Coast, as opposed to Emergency was Los Angeles County, and we all knew what LA County was back in the 1970s because of that show. Mm-hmm. So there is still some similarities, and once in a while we still watch that, and it's still a good show.
That's great.
So obviously, every day you're not out fighting fires. That's not your 24/7 thing. What is kind of your typical day of the life? Kind of what are you doing as the police chief?
Is the fire chief? Well,
oh, sorry, fire
that's
chief.
Okay.
Wow, I'm
okay.
so sorry.
We actually have been very busy with fires this whole month of March of 2021. This has been a very busy month with fires, both outside fires, and we've had some home fires. We've had some mutual aid fires, both in the towns of Whitman, the city of Brockton, just in the last couple of weeks. We've been very busy. There's no rhyme or reason for that. It's just for whatever reason there's been a lot of fire activity. So that has definitely kept us busy. Typically, we're much more busy with emergency medical incidents as well as motor vehicle accidents. Abington's really growing in terms of our population and the density and the traffic, as anybody that drives through town knows that. So we have our fair share amount of motor vehicle accidents. Usually they're small. A lot of times they're fender benders, which is good, but once in a while we do have some major crashes as well. Most of the fire apparatus, the fire trucks, we call it apparatus, they carry the different sets of the jaws of life, and we've got some very highly sophisticated specialized rescue equipment that we carry on the engines as well as the tower truck if needed. And we do a lot of training with that at different times too, like behind the highway department. We'll set up an old junk car, we'll do training. And certainly, again, the medical emergencies, and the last year has been different between this whole COVID. People actually don't want to go to the hospital as much, or because they're, they just don't want to. They don't want to be exposed to things, but they still get sick. So there's a lot more precautions both on our paramedic side, as well as I think a little bit of trepidation when people call us because they kind of know they're getting into something real that a year ago that wasn't really a concern whatsoever. So we had to kind of retool how we do our business every day because of COVID over the last year, and that's whether it's a medical emergency, a simple fire alarm investigation. We're going into a building, all wearing much more sophisticated masks than I have here, with all of the protective equipment, as you can imagine. it's changed all aspects of our job. But we're still busy. We still do what we do, and we just, like you folks as well in the schools, everybody has their challenges that we've overcome with it.
Yeah. So you said like you're going to accidents, you're going to kind of house calls. I kind of want to dive deeper into that. What's kind of a firefighter's job when it comes to like an accident? We'll use that first as an example, because like the police, obviously they take the report, but what would like a firefighter do on the job?
Good question. So we typically in Abington, we're all cross-trained as firefighter paramedics. So you'll see a fire engine go as well as an ambulance, and there's a reason for that. The ambulance, obviously, if there's somebody injured or hurt, and it has all of that equipment. The fire truck will respond to an accident as well as a medical emergency, because we need that extra trained personnel to assist, but we also have special tools and equipment on that engine that we may need, certainly in a car accident, but even sometimes for medical emergency, we have different equipment that we carry. So specifically talking about a car accident, the first thing we're gonna do when we show up is we're gonna make sure that the whole scene is safe. We wanna make sure that nobody hit a telephone pole and there could be electrical wires down, which does happen fairly more often than you would realize in this town. And we have to make sure that that hazard's not there. We don't wanna walk into a high voltage electrical line or have other cars drive into that. And they're very difficult to see, especially at night. And our lights are very bright, and that just adds to that. So we're checking to make sure the scene is safe. We're making sure that there's no traffic coming around us that's going to hit our first responders. We want to be very cautious of that. And then when we approach the vehicle, we want to make sure that the vehicle or the vehicles involved in the accident are not going anywhere, that they're stable. Make sure that they're in park. If they're on their side of their roof, that they're not going to tip, because that sometimes happens. We have special tools to support that. And all the while we're checking all this, we're also trying to maintain contact, even if it's eye contact, with whomever an injured person may be in the car, whether it's the driver or a passenger in any of the seats, to make sure that we don't want them moving until we get a chance to check them, because depending on the severity of the crash, they may have fractured a bone, or we always worry about the neck. If anybody fractured one of the, your C-spine, we call it, the cervical spine in your neck, that could lead to a severe injury. So we want to make sure nothing's moving on that patient until we're able to stabilize them, and then we methodically check them for any injuries. We check to see if they're coherent, because that could be a symptom if it was a head injury, or perhaps they were sick before the accident. That's what caused the accident. So we're doing all of these things that are going through our heads as we're doing it before we go to remove them from the vehicle if needed, and then we begin whatever patient care may be needed if it's an injury or medical emergency, and then ultimately to transport them to the hospital.
Awesome. That's a great answer.
Yeah. So you had talked about earlier how the different fire stations collaborate. How often does that happen, and what kind of determines whether Brockton helps out or Whitman helps out? Is it the size of the fire, the accident?
Excellent question. We're talking about mutual aid, where the different fire departments help each other. Recently Brockton had a 5-alarm fire. Now, to give you an example, what one alarm is, typically in the fire service, a 1-alarm fire is 2 fire engines and a ladder truck. That's typically a first alarm assignment. The reason we have that number is the first engine goes to the fire to attack the fire directly. The second engine is going to establish a water supply from a hydrant or water source to that engine to keep that going. And the ladder truck is going to show up, and they're going to do forcible entry into the building. We're going to open up the building. If it's full of smoke or heat, we're going to open windows or the roof at times, and we're just going to create a chimney effect to let the heat and smoke out. So that's a typical 1-alarm fire. Brockton, about a week or two ago, they had an older abandoned building that ended up going to 5 alarms. The main reason that went up to a full 5 alarms, which at that point really is 10 engines and 5 ladder trucks, is because they had trouble getting water in that section of the city. Every hydrant around that old building that was burning, and this was an old abandoned building, was kind of tied together, and every time they'd open one hydrant, the water pressure will go down. So they had to establish water from further hydrants away. And that takes a lot of fire hose, and it takes more engines, because we have to pump every 1,000 feet on that hose to keep that water moving towards the fire. That's the main reason that went up to 5 alarms. So that's one example. And in all of the towns surrounding the city of Brockton, some went directly to the fire, Some went to cover their fire stations because they had a number of incidents going on in the city in addition to that fire. And we do the same thing. If we have a fire in Abington, depending on how large the fire is, we may need additional resources to that fire to help us. But I also need at least one engine company, sometimes two, to go to our fire station to cover the rest of the town of Abington for other emergencies that are going to happen besides whatever incident we're dealing with. So that's called station coverage. And we do this all the time. We have the fire chiefs in all the different counties. We're Plymouth County. We're right next door to Norfolk County and Holbrook. We have what we call run cards. And it lists down, all right, if Abington has a first alarm fire, it'll be our engines. In Abington, it's engine 4, engine 2, and tower 1. If we go to another alarm, then it's going to be maybe a Rockland engine, a Whitman engine, and a Holbrook ladder. If it goes to and then we're going to have maybe a Weymouth engine to cover the station. And that just goes down ultimately up to 10 alarms in most cases. If we get to a 10 alarm fire, that's a major incident. And we hope we never do, but we've already planned out for that just in case. On a 10 alarm fire in Abington, we have Boston coming in to help us. Just to give you an idea that we plan this out. And all the area towns around us do the same thing. We coordinate this with Plymouth County Control, which is in the sheriff's office in Plymouth. They're kind of a central radio network that all of the towns in Plymouth County, we kind of coordinate with them to communicate with each other, because Abington may not directly talk to Hingham or to Duxbury or to Halifax if we need their apparatus coming. They'll do that for us. We've got that planned out as well.
So it's kind of like air traffic control.
Absolutely. It's an excellent analogy. Yes. Yep.
So you said the 10 alarm is like the biggest. I want to know what the biggest you've seen.
The biggest I have seen in my career was in Brockton. This is back about 1994, 95. It was the Spark Street fire. It was a massive old factory building that they had on Spark Street, near Spark and Ames Street in Brockton. That went up to, I think that one is a general alarm. And that may almost be beyond a 10 alarm. That was a massive fire. And ironically, I was just talking to the retired Brockton fire chief today about that fire. I saw him earlier today. And that was a massive fire. It was just a massive old mill fire in the city. And for whatever reason, it got burning. And once these large buildings get going, they're difficult to put out sometimes. And really, everybody was surrounding it and hitting it the best they can. And then there was a further perimeter around that, surrounding it, just to make sure that didn't get out, because we were all protecting the neighborhoods at that point. But in my career, that's the largest fire that I have seen.
Wow. There was recently a fire in Abington, about 30 acres.
Yep.
So do you know what caused that fire, and what was the procedure for putting that out?
We don't know what caused the fire. It's always difficult to determine the cause of an outside fire in the woods. Usually they're accidental. You know, it could have been smoking. It could have been anything. But that fire was discovered at night. That was about 1 o'clock in the morning. My captain, who was on duty, had the first call of that. It took him a while to find that. That was very deeply hidden in the woods in the area of town this was. I showed up on scene about 2 o'clock in the morning. We already had a forest fire in there. And, you know, I was in the woods looking around, and as far as you could see in all directions was just fire.
Wow.
There's no homes right in that area, but so I made the determination to pull everybody out, because firefighting in the woods at night is very dangerous. You can just slip and fall, or you can walk into a branch and get your eye. There's a lot of just hazards like that, as well as there was no way we were putting this fire out at night. There was too much fire. We were going to have to build up a massive task force with mutual aid, and it's dangerous to do at night. We were crossing a river to get to it. There's a winch on the front of the forest fire. And we were all winching this out at 2:30 in the morning with fire around us. We're trying to protect us. So it was a little crazy, but we got it out. There were no injuries, no damage. So I withdrew everybody. We protected the exterior roads and buildings until about 6 o'clock in the morning, or 5:45 when it became daylight again. And at that point, we went back in, and I called about 5 mutual aid towns to come with their forest fire trucks, and we split that with 2 different locations. 3 trucks went on one side, almost 3 trucks went in a different location with like a pincer effect, and we were able to successfully extinguish that. Now, that area I was familiar with, because twice in my career we've had massive fires in there that have lasted almost a week.
Wow.
Both of those times were in the fall. and the ground was much drier, and a lot of times the fire burns down into the ground. You wouldn't think that the dirt burns, but it does, especially when it's dry, and it's very difficult to extinguish. Fortunately, we're still in the spring and the ground is still fairly wet, so it was just the surface vegetation burning, but once it reached the ground, it was kind of extinguishing itself. So that helped us immensely. And we were out of there, I think, by noontime that day. So that was actually a very rapid extinguishment of a huge area that we were able to get around. So we were very fortunate.
You sound like a man who like loves your job. I feel like it's like your passion. Like I heard you talk. Like I can see the excitement in your eyes when you talk about this. So for somebody like, because our main audience is high school students and some parents as well, but it's mostly students. What advice would you give for someone would want to go into this field, or maybe is apprehensive about going into this field?
Excellent question. And I do love this job.
Yeah.
You know, a firefighter, the fire service is a fascinating job. There's so many different aspects to it. Fire is all science. It's completely science. We have to study the buildings that are burning. There's all different types of buildings. So you get into architecture and building construction. The materials that are burning, you get into the science of the hazardous materials that are burning. And then there's the whole emergency medical portion in the anatomy of the human body and the understanding the pharmaceuticals, the pharmacology of the medications we give. And you know, there's so many aspects of this job, it really gets fascinating. For a high school kid that wants to get into this, and I really was not, I didn't really see this in my career path in the high school back then. I was not the best student, I'll be honest with you. I'm going to be perfectly upfront with that. I was not the best student. I did graduate here from Abington High School. I think I still owe Coach Kelleher a detention. This is not taped, right? But that was back then. We all grow up, so beyond that, you know, sometimes after high school, when you maybe have a better idea which career path you want to do, and then you begin taking classes, or whether it's college or different courses towards that, it really changes, because now you're going to school for something you want to do, not something that they're telling you have to learn. And a lot of times, and I'm seeing this with my kids, what do we have to learn algebra for? What do we have to learn this for? They're giving you tools in a toolbox that you're going to use sometime in your life, and you're not going to realize it until maybe 20 years later, and you're going to be glad they did it. It's a little different going through that, because you don't always see that, but looking back, the things that I did learn here, I really wish I spent more time and effort on that, not just to get good grades, which I didn't have, but just so I would have learned that better, because after high school, I really learned that, because at that point it became a passion. An example of this, and I used to teach this in the schools. I was one of the firefighters that used to go into the schools as the safe instructor to talk to them. And some of the older kids, I'd say, you know, we used to learn geometry, and you'd have to find the area of a cylinder or the area of a square, and why? You know, where are we going to use this? Well, if we have a fire and there's no fire hydrants around, but there's a swimming pool in the backyard, and we know that maybe it's a 20-foot diameter swimming pool and it's 4 feet high, and we can kind of do some math and know how many gallons of water are in that swimming pool. That is a massive cylinder in somebody's backyard, and we figure the volume, and then you figure how much water goes in there, and I know there may be 20,000 gallons of water in that swimming pool. And if we're spraying about 150 gallons a minute out of our hose, or 500 gallons a minute if it's the deck gun from the truck, that's going to give me maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes of water. Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now back in high school, when somebody was trying to tell me this is what you had to learn, I didn't really care back then. But now that I realize what that can be used for, or the large area or volume of a square or a rectangle, well, that's a building. And if I know that I have a large building that's 70 feet by maybe 150 feet, and maybe it's 5 stories, so it's 50 feet tall, that's a massive building, and if each one of those floors is burning, they taught us at the fire academy how many gallons of water may be needed to put that fire out. And when we know how many gallons of water it is, now I have to think, well, how many engine companies is that? Because if one engine company can give me maybe 1,000 gallons a minute, but this massive building is going to require 70,000 gallons a minute to put out to contain it, I need at least 7 engines to take care of that. So it all kind of starts making sense later on. I wish I had paid better attention to all of this when I was in high school, but luckily I did learn enough in Abington, and I did graduate, to be able to move forward that that really gave me those skills that now I'm really applying them every day. So,
Wow, another great answer. For my final question, we're going to get personal.
sure.
This is obviously, you said you love this job, and we can clearly see that, but this is an intense job. What's the most life-changing thing you've experienced while on the job?
Life-changing. There's been a number of them. And I grew up in Abington. I still live in Abington. And most of our calls, obviously, that I respond to occur in Abington. And there's good calls, and sometimes we have not good calls. As you can imagine, we do see our share of tragedies, whether it's an accident or medical emergencies or whatever. As well as we've had births. I was involved in the delivery of a baby in front of the old Mary Lou's News on Washington Street. That is now closed, but right in Washington Center, in Abington Center on Washington Street. And that was in 1993, I believe. And there was a little baby girl born right there in the front seat of a car at about midnight. And that was one of the highlights, certainly. We always try to remember a lot of the good things because we do have a lot of tragedies. I've been to a lot of difficult calls, and that's going to happen every department. If any fighter or paramedic works, you're gonna run into that. And yeah, that can be life-changing, and there are those memories. We do have them. We're neighbors, and we do see those scenes every time we go by those intersections or homes or whatnot. And there's a certain dignity with that. We don't really talk about it to preserve their memories as well as the families. And, we see life, and you said it, raw. We see the raw side of life, whether it's somebody coming into the world or somebody going out of the world. And that's difficult, but at the same time, not every job has that. And it can take a toll, to be honest with you. After a while, it does, you try not to dwell on those calls because it's a part of your job, but, you try to look at the other side as well. So.
Thank you so much again for coming on our little show and for your years of service.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it's been
it.
great.
Thanks for watching. Tune in next week for a brand new episode of The Weekly Wave.
And make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms at The Weekly Wave and The Green Wave Gazette.
Stay safe.
Goodbye, everybody.